Hi, my name is Allan Aitchison. I'm here to talk to you about aligning IT. And in that sense, it's all around trying to get IT, the business, suppliers, to work together as a group, make them a lot better than they can be individually. This represents a series of changes and improvements over time, and there's an awful lot of elements to try and get those to work together. What I've tried to do in the following presentation is to describe in a nutshell how you could do it. Sadly, I can't put every single detail into that. After all, I've spent a long time both reading and doing, but I'm doing what I can to try and give you some ideas and pointers that might help you. So, straight on with it. IT maturity. So, IT maturity, all business units, you can imagine, should be all around trying to create value, to reduce cost, and to create differentiation. And you can imagine IT is just another one of those business units. So in that sense, IT's aspiration shouldn't be around just trying to create cut its own cost. It should be all around trying to see how many, and if possible, all three of those it can deliver. And so what we've got here is a slide telling you an idea around here are all those things that IT could do better. Moving on to an IT maturity model, I described how there are very vaguely three different steps in maturity. One of them representing a cost-managed IT organisation, and there are still quite a few of those around, and they're simply interested in looking internally around cutting IT cost. There are problems with that approach because it's so insular and internal, but either way, then I described underneath a series of steps that would get you to an ROI-based organisation. And now you're starting to look outwards, try to improve the business and create business outcomes. And then again, moving up to a business partner. And that business partner now is engaging with the business, third parties, and the board to become a true influencer in gaining advantage both for IT, but more particularly for the company. And then I've described a typical progress. And the typical progress isn't start at the bottom, finish at the top. You would push on quite a few different levels, and some of those will work and some of them won't. And rather than thinking that I have to wait until I've ticked every single box to get from A to B, it's a case of finding things that work, because different organisations are different, but finding ways that work and then building on those. Moving on then to a typical cost-managed organisation. I've described roughly what they're like here on this slide, and you can imagine that if many companies are in that situation, especially the smaller ones, but either way, many of them are in that state, and it is around trying to improve what they have. I've described how realistically there are some elements you really need to do. So I talked about the project management office refresh. It's vital to have that. You need to have confidence in the numbers you produce, the KPIs, understand that you've got correct processes to run along, really obvious ITIL service management elements, and a tactical delivery plan to try and get you further. Now, because at this point there is no strategy, what you're trying to do is to improve the cost, improve revenue, try and improve benefit, rather than move towards something, because as yet the something isn't mapped. So it's more around best practice and improvement rather than knowing exactly where you're going. I would pick out especially the KPIs, and the reason I talk about those, and I list them in the presentation, but the KPIs are important because that sets a benchmark, and you can imagine if you're not careful, you might well make a vast amount of improvement that no one will see because no one's measuring. Also, you can imagine that you will want to manage what you measure and measure what you manage. So again, without KPIs, you're very likely to be going in the wrong direction or won't be able to talk about your successes. One of those KPIs might not be completely obvious, so I'm just going to pick that one out, which is the supply and demand ratio. You can imagine if you're an in-sourced organisation, you might use man days or FTE days, and if you're an outsourced organisation, you might use pounds. But the idea is the same. In that sense, you can add up all of the potential projects you currently have and you compare that to the amount of resource you currently have. And if the ratio continues to increase and increase and increase, then you can start to use that as a means to talk to your management to say, you really need more resources because this backlog is just getting larger and larger and larger. If the moment it's shrinking, it's showing that you're doing a really great job. So you can spin it one way or the other. But either way, you can imagine understanding that ratio is really important. So moving on to a typical ROI managed organisation. Now you're developing quite a lot more benefit. You're delivering quite a lot. You have an amount of plan that you're now working with. And you have limited conversations with your bosses talking around benefits. What you don't necessarily have is engagement at business model levels, because there might not be enough trust yet. But either way, you're progressing towards that, and I've described some elements that would help you further. So in that sense, helping with the business model, contributing to that, influencing what the shape might be, because you're becoming a trusted IT advisor at least, and you can start to say how this could be implemented in this way, but unfortunately this can't be implemented very well. And you start to influence the board's thinking, and by starting to influence them, a snowball continues to grow and grow and grow, and you'll keep that going. You can also start to develop operational excellence. As you're having to create lots of business analysis anyway, you can start to lead operational excellence processes, because you already created KPIs for yourself. It will be quite easy to create KPIs for everyone else, and you're now saying how you're moving from an insular organisation to something which is much more business focused. And as long as you then make the leap from KPIs to best practice, and you start really selling best practice rather than simply creating some spreadsheets, then you're doing really well. Then connecting to customers. Again, IT has become a wonderful tool to connect directly with customers. And in that sense, it doesn't really matter whether it's a B2C company or a B2B. You're seeing so many FMCG companies now that are trying to get past the companies that work with them to gain loyalty from their end customer. So one way or another, IT can do an awful lot. The biggest thing that could drag that whole lot together would be to start creating an IT strategy. And you can imagine that IT strategy will have a number of different organisations that will need to talk. So the IT team will probably have some really good ideas. The directors and the board will definitely have some ideas about where they wish to go. Then you have other staff members who will probably have some really great ideas, and also some gripes about what is happening today. Suppliers will tell you that the next release of everything is brilliant, and you can work with those. But they'll also tell you other things. They'll tell you what your competitors are doing. They'll tell you that a new acquisition they're about to make will do wonders for you. So between all of those groups, if you start to build up your plan, you will get a plan that will start to align IT over many years to what the business strategy is. And by developing those two, you start to create economies of scale. Those economies of scale will mean that you can have a 3 or a 5-year relationship with a partner, rather than simply a tactical relationship of, I want 5 of those, please. By doing that, you'll get a lot of cost reduction, but secondly, and my experience has been, it's the contractual conditions that will make a bigger difference than 3% margin or 5% margin. Because you now know where you're going, then you can start to look at things like an IT target operating model, which might be different to what you have today. And with that 5-year view, you can start to shape yourself towards it. That might also involve supplier relationships and supplier management to cut down and focus on those key ones. It could also involve training. Now you know you need more of this and less of that. You can work with those. And lastly, going back to the target operating model, it might also involve sourcing, whereby you, as an embodiment of the IT organisation, need to focus on what the business needs. And you could imagine there might be some tasks in IT that would be better served sourced by others. So either way, you really need to try and think around how IT strategy can influence an awful lot around what the IT is going to look like. And you can create plans. And therefore, the last one, redefining your KPIs. You can imagine you've got an awful lot to do with ROI already, But you now need something around how are you tracking to that strategy. Because you've got a strategy, it's going to move along. And lastly, there's an amount of realism, which is today a plan will want us to go in some direction, and tomorrow there'll be a better idea and it will change. So rather than thinking you're only ever marching towards one goal in 6 months' time or a year's time, it's likely to be a slightly different goal. Does outsourcing affect IT strategizing or creating a business partner? Well, actually, it is the same process, although there will be slight differences. There'll be more influence or organisational change around having better supplier managers. And you can imagine some tasks would actually be delivered by the outsourcers. However, if you take the actual steps themselves and where you need to get to, they are exactly the same. What will this deliver? So it's an important thing to think about the fact that it's not a personal crusade. It's not one person who's going to deliver all of this lot. A win is an IT win, a whole IT team win. And then secondly, of course, since it's supporting the business, it would be a business win. And if you can get suppliers to start to align costs to business outcomes, supplier wins. It becomes a whole group win rather than simply a personal success. There'll be a massive increase in the profit from IT, great increase in IT team retention because everyone's now associated with the success, and of course there'll be more influence on the board because you're a successful IT organisation supporting the business. Why doesn't everyone do it? Well, it is difficult. Rather than thinking it's as simple as this 5-minute presentation, it really does take time. And pushing ahead in lots of different areas usually means that some parts of the business are happy, some aren't. Some suppliers are, some aren't. And either way, it's around building and garnering success. Does it change how you work? Well, yes it does. You've got to be more collaborative. You've got all these different groups who you need to align and influence and push along. But now you've got a plan, and your plan then shows you how you're going to come along and succeed. By doing this, you'll be able to differentiate your company rather than simply you or your IT team. But either way, the success, the size of the success is massive, and I would absolutely recommend doing it. Thank you very much for your time. The simple answer is no. And that's because you can imagine it relates to influence. And in different organisations, they're ready to be influenced, be it either in the IT team, in the leadership team, or with their suppliers. And so some organisations are ready, most organisations are ready in parts. And it relates to finding those elements that work, nudging those along and building on those successes. I think the first thing is have a plan. So even before you turn up, start to try and understand what the organisation's like. You can look at best practice, you can look at some benchmarks that are out there and have a plan at least. And you can imagine with every plan, it's not prescriptive, you'll never get to the end of it, but you've at least got something. And the idea behind that is it will change over time. But either way, have that plan. You need to invest time in your team. It is a team game, this. And therefore you need to try and make certain that you invest time in your team to get them first of all to their individual potential, and secondly the potential as a team. And the whole lot absolutely takes time because there's elements to do with coaching and there are elements to do with trust, and getting those working is really important. Then you need to try and make certain that you have time to read, and so the technology transformation network is a really useful resource to actually pick up information, as is the internet and the books and whatever else. And if for the moment you're working flat out, you don't have the time to actually read and improve. You also don't have enough time to reflect on what's happening today and improve your plan. And so that whole lot means you need to try and make certain that you have enough time in your day to devote to developing yourself and your team and your plan going forward. Well, I've always had this really strong desire to make a difference. Many, many years ago, when I was working on individual projects, I might be able to, if I work really well, change and improve it by 5% or 10%. And as time went on, the projects became larger and the business criticality got larger, but it's still that same 10% or 15%. About 15 years ago, I started working with portfolios, and then on to the whole of IT. And there, when you start having these long-term plans and developing huge plans connecting up all the dots between businesses and ITs and suppliers and so on, the difference is way larger than 10%. And at the same time, the scale has become that much larger as well. And in which case, for me, it relates to simply making that difference. Rather than it has to be coding or it has to be coaching, it is whatever's necessary to make it happen. And in that sense, you can imagine part of the motivation for being here is to talk to the network and to try and see how I can help everyone else out there to improve. And in that spirit, what I would hope is people who have a look at this video and the presentation might be able to suggest lots of additions to try and improve it. And I'm sure one way or another we could somehow publish updates if they come along. And you can imagine then everybody contributes to a collaborative exercise to make it better for us all.